Hello, everybody, and welcome to this midday special webinar. And thank you, Dr. Kara, for joining us. My name is Yair, and this is going to be a treat for you. You're going to hear, Kara was basically going to tell you things straight from her heart with no filtering and what she thinks about a lot of different stuff. And Jill is going to introduce her in a minute. But I'll just tell you that I'm Yair, and as you can see, I'm a physician. I'm an educator of not children, but I have two kids of my own. And in the last year, I've been very worried about the schools and the education technology and the nonstop computers in the public school and the cell phones. And in our district, which is called Lower Merion outside of Philadelphia, it kind of became the national attention because there's a lot of ongoing engagement between the parents mostly, which is now an organization called uh, Pencils Over Pixels, versus the leadership of the school district. And the school district is kind of we're negotiating because we are interested in opting out from the core curriculum delivery by the digital media, by computers, etc. And actually, just in the last few days, there's a lot of things that are happening. There's voting, but I'm not going to get into this. So this is very relevant to all of the parents across the nation, but specifically right now also to our district. So with that, I'm going to introduce Jill. So Jill, my partner in crime, thank you, Jill, for joining us. And actually, Jill is now not only that she's a teacher, but she's a very, very, very active teacher. And right now, she's in her classroom on her lunch break. So she may slip out for a few minutes before the end, but she really is a veteran classroom teacher. She's a parent. She's a community organizer. She's from upstate New York or from New York State, founder of the Mindful Tech Lessons. And she has over 20 years of teaching experience, background in education psychology. She is so passionate, and she's really positioning herself as one of the teacher leaders in the United States with all this movement to learn more about education technology and the computers and going back to the human-based teaching and textbooks. And most importantly, she's really passionate teacher, as I told you, that she always asks herself and everybody else the question, what is the best thing for the children? So, Jill, thank you very much for joining, and why don't you take it from here?
Yes, I'm so excited to introduce Kara that has so much to offer us that we're only going to touch like the tip of it today. So it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Kara Alaimo. And Dr. Alaimo is a professor of communication at Fairleigh Dickinson University, where she's created the university's academic programs in social media. Since 2016, she has written opinion and analysis pieces for CNN, examining how digital technology is shaping our lives, relationship, and society. She's the author of a great book called Over the Influence: Why Social Media is Toxic for Women and Girls and How We Can Take It Back, which explores the impact of social media on women and girls and offers practical solutions for families, educators, and communities. I love that you always offer solutions. I've noticed in your work, and that makes me very happy. Before her academic career, she served as a spokesperson in the Obama administration and worked in communications at the United Nations. Today, she frequently speaks with educators, students, and parents about children's screen use and how we can help young people navigate an increasingly connected world. So thank you so much for giving us some of your time today. There's so many people that are really excited to learn from you. So I thought I would start with the first question. And I see a lot of parallels between your earlier work and what's kind of happening now as a nation in classrooms. So your book, Over the Influence, focused on how social media affects women and girls specifically. But as you've continued doing your research on digital technology more broadly, do you see connections between the concerns that you've raised in that work and in your book with the increasing use of screens and technology in schools? I know that's a big one, but I was curious if they connected.
Definitely. Thank you for that great question. And so, of course, digital technology affects kids of all genders. In my book, I looked specifically at women and girls because I think that there are specific harms, and we look at things like body image or garnering the attention of sexual predators online that do more severely impact girls. But generally, I've been speaking to parents and students and educators across the country and writing for CNN about kids of all genders. And I think no one can escape the harms of being on a screen all day. Doesn't matter your gender, and I'm increasingly worried about this for my own children because, like so many of you, I feel like the data is very clear that our kids don't belong on screens in schools. With some exceptions, I want my children to take technology class and learn how to use a computer and learn how to protect and empower themselves online. But I want them to be learning to read and to write on paper and pencils. And I think many of you are wise to this data as well, which is very clear that our kids shouldn't be learning these basic things on screens. And I fear that our kids right now are this lost generation, right? And so eventually, of course, they're going to take screens out of classrooms for teaching, things like writing and math because they're harmful to kids. But I worry that by the time it's done, it's going to be too late for my daughters and for your children.
So let me actually ask you, Kara, a question based on what you told me when we spoke. And actually, you already emphasized this as one of your first things that you mentioned. To you, and this is the million-dollar question, I guess. To you, it seems obvious that it's just a matter of time that the current education technology, meaning using the computers, the Chromebooks, the iPads, as a method to deliver core curriculum, social sciences, math, reading and writing, you believe that it's obviously you mentioned it's going to go away. How are you so sure about this? Because we often talk about, this is a multi-trillion, so it's coming from, Silicon, Google, all Facebook, all of that. It's such a powerful industry. And, I mean, for me, many of us, and I actually just spoke with Jill earlier this morning, to us, in many ways, there are the harms of the technology. And again, we're not anti-technology. We think that there is room for computer carts, et cetera, for, learning about technology, et cetera, or robotics or whatnot. But as the way that it's now, it is clearly harmful. And in many ways, it's very similar to the cigarettes, the tobacco industry, many decades ago, or me as a physician, I live in Philadelphia, we have a huge opioid issue. At
Mm.
first people said, oh, opioids are fine. And even though people started detecting it, it took a very long time to push it away. And it's not, you see, there's still a lot of people smoking, for example. How are you so sure that this is going to go away?
So I think, yes, tech companies are incredibly powerful, which is how they've gotten their devices into our kids' classrooms. But I think parents are even more powerful and even more committed to protecting our kids. I also think to get back to Jill's original question, there are really great parallels here with social media, right? And so, it used to be the case that people would laugh if you told them, "Oh, my daughter's not going to have social media when she's a teenager," right? And now we've seen this growing tide of lawsuits that have ended poorly for tech companies, for social media companies. I see kids increasingly recognizing and telling me that they know that social media is bad for them. Yes, they're addicted. We have to work on these problems, but it's so clear how public opinion has shifted against social media companies despite their power. And I see the tide of public opinion shifting against screens in schools. And I also think that eventually educators are going to have to catch up with the data. So, in my opinion, there isn't a lot of room to argue that the data is wrong, right? The data is very clear that students who use computers more perform worse on standardized tests, that students learn better when they take notes by hand rather than typing on a screen. And part of the reason for that, just so you know, is that once you get good at typing, I could pretty much transcribe this whole meeting. But if I'm in Jill's classroom and she's delivering a lecture, I can't hand write everything that she says. So I'm forced to use my brain. I'm forced to think about what she's saying and think about what the most important things are and write them down. And the whole point of going to school, of course, is to learn to use your brain. Um, and then we also know that when we read things on screens, we absorb far less than when we read them on paper. And then, of course, there's all of the mental and physical effects of staring at screens all day, which I've been reporting on for CNN. But The Office of the Surgeon General just issued an advisory warning that by the year 2050, it is expected that 45% of kids will be nearsighted because of being on screens all day, right?
Not
And
to,
you know,
I
these
just have a great observation from that. I was reflecting actually in the last couple of years that when I first started teaching 20 years ago, there was literally one or two students that wore glasses. Now it's half my class.
yes.
And it's
Um,
wild to really live it and see that this is not just a statistic, you know?
Totally. So all the data's there. Like if someone told me, "Oh, I'm not sure we have enough data that screens don't belong in schools," I would laugh at them, right? The data's all there. The problem is, as we've said, these companies are powerful, and also there's inertia, right? Contracts are in place. Teachers are teaching a certain way, and in my experience, most teachers are like Jill, who want to do what's best for kids. But I do think there is the issue that it can be much easier to quote unquote teach kids on Chromebooks. So when I was reporting on this issue for CNN, I interviewed a parent in my own school district who told me that her middle school daughter was in a history class where the teacher had not taught a lesson the entire year. She told me this in May. And so this history teacher has the kids doing work on Chromebooks for 80 minutes a day. And the other teacher, the other middle school teacher who teaches history, has her class acting out scenes from history, right? So there's so much latitude, and most teachers are like the latter. But there is the problem that there is this discretion to hand over Chromebooks and sit at your desk, and God knows what that teacher is doing with the time, but not his job.
And also, we've been learning that there are some schools and districts that the teacher are required. Like they
Yes.
have to log a certain amount of minutes on whatever platform, like you said, that the district has contracted. And there are teachers, they're afraid to speak out. I'm very lucky I don't have that situation personally with my district, but they're afraid to speak out against it because they're required to do it. So it really does, I feel like, stem from like the top of the leadership of that school or that district to trickle down. My next question, which you basically kind of hit on, was what some of the research is showing about the impacts of screens on, attention, memory. You hit reading, so or deep reading, I should say. But I was also curious if you want to add a little bit more about the research. But have you found there's any age groups that you are especially concerned about, or does it just look different to you to each age group?
Yeah, it's the latter. And I'm concerned about everyone, but we see the effects of this in different ways on different kids. So one thing I'd say is I started teaching as a professor full time in the year 2014. And this is a big generalization. Obviously, there are many exceptions to the rule, but back in 2014, I could assign my students books to read. They could read them, come to class, and have a discussion in which respectful arguments and counter arguments were made. And now the ability of the average college student who I teach to do that is just so much lower. If I assign my students like a whole book to read, they'll tell me, like, if you'd given me a shorter passage, I might have read it, but it's your fault for expecting me to read a book, right? Again, not all students, but definitely an argument I've received. And it's the critical thinking skills that are missing, I think, in older students. When AI can write your paper, you miss out on all that. And so, my daughters are in elementary school, and we still talk about how, like, if you are to write a paper, you have to read material, you have to understand it, then you have to practice your writing skills, you have to practice your skill at making an argument. Why would you ever let a computer do that for you? Because in the end, you're just cheating yourself. But and then I'm also, of course, worried about safety for kids of every age. Um, the fact that there's always workarounds, there's always ways to get around parental and educator safeguards, and we definitely do not know that there are not kids out there who are connecting with predators on their school issued Chromebooks.
So this is very interesting. Thank you. The next question that I have is related to something because I also have two kids who are in elementary, and in fact, with my younger child who's in kindergarten, we took away his from the beginning of the year. He has no iPad and he has like work instead, math, etc. My daughter a few weeks ago brought home, after our insistence, we looked at all the apps and there were so many apps and passwords and tabs and iReady and like it was gaming and everything. So we basically told no more of that. We kept the computer at home. Of course, we're going to return it when they tell us to, but she's not going to get any more in school. The problem is that we've discussed it last week in a policy meeting that we had with the district. And towards the end, several parents came up and say, well, you are all fighting the computers. You're all fighting the computers, and you want no computers, no education technology, but you are forgetting the achievement gap. You are forgetting the inequity, huge problems that we have in our specific district. Very wealthy people and very, not. And the problem is that just simply it sounds okay. You give everybody a computer, so you're improving the equity. But as far as I know, it actually makes the equity and the achievement gap worse. And maybe you can address this because this is a big issue specifically for our district, but many places also where already the problem of achievement gap is huge.
So I think we need to look at it by grade level. So if we're talking about elementary school, there is something I worry about, and it's not this gap. It's not the socioeconomic one. It's actually kids with disabilities. And so what I want to see in an elementary school context is my daughter going to technology class, learning how to type and use a computer, and learning how to protect herself online. And she has a great technology class and teacher where she's doing that. That's all you need in elementary school, right? So in high school, it's a little bit different where there is an issue of access because kids really do need a computer to type their paper and to do research. But that's not what's happening in elementary school. I do, though, think it's important to mention that there are cases when technology is useful to students with disabilities. And so I have a child in my extended family who has Williams syndrome. She's in third grade and she cannot write her name. She is learning to type, and that is the way that she is going to communicate while everyone continues to try to teach her to write. And so for a child like that, technology can be a lifeline, and that's where exceptions need to be made as part of IEPs. But in general, um, in an elementary school context, we really don't have this problem of access because kids do not need screens at home to do homework. And in fact, kids are better off not having screens at home. And that's really the issue of privilege, right? So we know that kids from lower socioeconomic backgrounds tend to spend more time on screens, which is really, really bad for them. And so I think the argument is needs to be reversed.
I absolutely love that, and that fits everything that I've seen in my experience. I do Screen Free Week, National Screen Free Week that used to be like TV Free Week, and then it's evolved over all of the years. And it always surprises me which students find that the easiest and which students find that the most challenging, because there are a lot of family norms in more privileged families where they don't even access screens throughout the week, and it's like something special on the weekend at designated times and whatnot. And so I have felt that it is really the equity issue has totally in reverse. And so I will say that most of the research that I hear matches my experience as an elementary educator. I'm curious if you found in all of your work with other educators, if they're also finding there to be a connection between the research and their experiences.
So you mean between what the data tells us and then what's actually playing out in schools?
Yes, because some people will say that, it's not accurate. And also, as we know, data can be like twisted or manipulated. Like I know there's recent data about the phone ban saying it didn't increase test scores. And, we never wanted that for test scores, quite frankly. And it's the greatest thing that ever happened to me as a teacher. So I was just curious, like what you hear a teacher's takes about the research. For me, it really does match. And when it doesn't, like that example, I'm like, no, please keep it.
Well, yeah, I'll tell you why. So that was a pretty crazy study that found
Yeah.
that taking cell phones away didn't increase or improve student learning outcomes. And I'll tell you why. It's because schools are taking away kids' personal devices and replacing them with school-issued devices. This is not a big mystery here. And so I think like the moment we're at right now is a pretty funny one where schools, and I'll tell you, like, I'm one of the people whose schools hire to come talk to parents and students, right? I do assemblies for schools. I talk to parents about how to handle their screen use. I tell parents to take screens away from kids. That's all great. But now we're at this moment where schools are telling parents, take your kids' screens away and then putting kids on screens all day at school. And I think one of the most helpful new tools in the arsenal of people who care about this is the Office of the Surgeon General's new advisory, because that suggests that kids ages 6 to 18 spend no more than 2 hours a day on screens. That's 2 hours for homework, for, socializing, for school, everything. I can tell you one of my daughters is in that age range, and I think 2 hours is too much. I would never let her go on a screen for 2 hours a day, right? But we also know that advisory also tells us that the average 13 to 18-year-old spends more than 8 hours a day on screens. Um, and so for me, that's a really helpful tool. I'm speaking at a school board meeting in my town next week, and that's one of my most powerful arguments is kids in our town are spending more than the recommended time, of our public health authorities on screens. And so I think that that's a really great sort of argument for us to be making. But in general, I think so that's like the weird moment we're in right now, where like schools keep telling parents, take away your kids' screens and then giving them to kids. I think in general, the data is really clear that like no one learns well on screens, but it is misaligned with what's happening in classrooms. So the New York Times did a survey last year, and 99% of K to 12 teachers responded that their schools issue digital devices. So pretty much all this is a problem for every
I
kid in
was
America.
actually quoted in that study and I took it
For
as
you.
well. And it's so interesting because you see the difference because not sending the device home really does change things in a great way. First of all, you're not intruding on that family's living space, which I don't want that in my home. And second of all, like you're then not giving digital homework. So, which I think is a win as well. So it's just like I don't know why we are still like I mean I don't work somewhere where we do that, but like there's still places that I'm now hearing some districts want to give kindergartners iPads for the summer to do. I can't believe this.
I would say, there's that 1% or whatever of teachers who are reporting that, they don't issue digital devices, and I bet it is the privileged ones. You've probably seen the reporting that parents in Silicon Valley don't let their kids on screens, right? But in general, it's ubiquitous.
So I wanted to ask you, this is interesting. I wanted to ask you a question, and you made me, I read the recent, you just published in the last couple of weeks, a few articles and, opinions about, in the CNN. And one of the things that you wrote is exactly about the screen time for children that is, and this is the question that I have. Is it truly harmful? Because we keep hearing there's concerns, and I've heard it also from scientists, this cognitive stunting. We've heard, from the 60 Minutes Australia about digital dementia that is also relevant to children. Do you think that this is actually harmful to the brain? Or, as you wrote, just I think it was last week, you mentioned that, kids, let's say they sleep 11 hours if they're young, and they have only 12, 13 hours of being awake time, and every minute is special. They can do things, they can practice things, they can play, they can read, they can do whatever stuff. And you're saying that if they are on the screen, what it does basically, it steals their time. So if the kids are, like you said, there are 8 hours on the screen or 6 hours, the benefits to the brain development are not that great. Certainly not as if my daughter is going and creating pictures and a statue or reading or going outside and playing or doing yoga or whatever it is. So, do you think that the screens are actually harmful, or is it mostly just because you're wasting precious time?
I was going to say, how much time do you have? Because I could talk till the end of the webinar about how harmful screens are for kids, but I'll try to condense this and just say that there was a study published last week that established this concept, the criticome, for this really critical period of time in a child's development when their brain is plastic. And so, if you learn a language before age 15, you can become fluent. And if you learn it at age 16, for the rest of your life, everyone will say to you, "Where are you from?" Because you won't be able to get rid of your accent, right? And so, as you say, this is a critical period of time where, like, when I take my daughter to her piano lesson, it's not just that she's not on a screen, it's that this is the period of time to develop the neural connections to understand and appreciate and play music. But then the other part of that is I interviewed a psychologist I love from Princeton for that piece, and she talked about how it's so harmful for kids to get this intense stimulation from screens, right? So everything's moving quickly, there's fast colors. Also, like being up close is intensely stimulating to our brains. And so she talked about how all these things that like would have been considered fun in childhood a generation ago. Do you want to go to the beach? Do you want to go to the movies? No, kids don't want to do that. Kids just want to be on screens. There was another study published just a few days ago that found that like kids would rather be on screens than play with toys. But that's not what's good for them, right? And so they're addictive. Screens are addictive, just like alcohol and cigarettes can be. And that's where like it's our job to get kids off of them. And then I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about like all the safety things, right? The sexual predators, the deep fakes. I mean, we could talk for hours about this.
So with that, I have a follow-up question, and I'll actually merge a question from the audience because at the beginning of all of this, it's kind of what to your point and to Jill's point, this was about screens and people were talking about wait until eighth and don't give their kids the cell phone. And then it started becoming an issue of okay, so we're not going to have screens at home. And now the focus of the attention is the Chromebooks, the one-to-one devices, etc. But Felicia, who's a developmental psychologist, is asking, she goes to a lot of public schools and classrooms, and she says that it's not only about the one-to-one devices. When the teacher is presenting, they often nowadays they don't have lesson plans, and they're using often pre-existing YouTube videos, which basically, or online, whatever, or the smart boards that is kind of like it's becoming a big issue. So us, like in your vision, going back to my first question, that you think that education technology is eventually we're going to look at it like, oh my God, we were crazy to do this to our kids. Do you
Yeah.
think that if we get rid of all the Chromebooks, is this still a big problem with the smart board? And is it too late? Meaning the teachers that maybe not Jill because she's been doing this for 20 years, but the teachers who started maybe in the last 10 years after COVID, whatever, this is what they're used to. Is it something that we can reverse back to how we were before?
I hope so. One idea would be for just to ban, like, to block YouTube, so that teachers can't access it. I was wondering, I asked my daughter who's in first grade, like, just let me know what ads you see on YouTube, right? Because that's something no one can control, what YouTube serves up. And my daughter will come home from school and say, I saw an ad for Lufthansa, and I'll tell her what Lufthansa is, right? So like that, I think that's a huge, huge concern as well. Like we don't know what's being served up apart from what the teacher selected. And I do think that blocking YouTube is a really good solution. I'll tell you, like once in a blue moon, I'll use YouTube in my college classes to illustrate a really essential point. I teach a class on intercultural communication and I play a voice recording of a pilot and an air traffic controller and the plane crashes. Why? Because they didn't understand what I was teaching you, in this lesson. So every once in a blue moon, I'll use a clip that really illustrates a point. But in general, I know that my daughter is seeing YouTube clips like every single day in her classroom, and that's, you know, not
Yeah.
right.
I think that this is like a thing for teacher training and as you know, like teachers' lives are just so incredibly busy that there's not time. Like, so I'm going to just give an example of I find myself over analyzing my teaching, but it helps me speak to things like this. So I don't think YouTube should be allowed on student devices, like hard stop. But if it's on a teacher device, and I've been using this recently because this is what I'm teaching now. I'm teaching a unit on marine life. We're all in expert marine life groups. I've got an amazing amount of books, and every year I add to it because I have a set curriculum. So I know that I need books in this topic, which helps me get more resources. We've read about it, we've looked at articles, I've got pictures, we've done all sorts of activities. And then each day I focus one animal, and I find it is on YouTube. But what I do is I pre-watch the video, I embed it in a slide so there's no autoplay, there's no advertisements, and then I show the clip. But it is communal learning. It is me sitting with the class. We are together. It is not me putting on something and leaving, and then something new could go on. Because as cool as it is to research a dolphin, there is something magical about seeing real multimedia of a
Yeah.
dolphin go underground and hearing their noises and seeing. So I'm always so cautious because I don't want to micromanage teachers, but I also want to recognize that everything can be done in a great way or maybe a not so great way. And how do we teach these things and make sure that we hold everyone accountable to the best practice? Because I know there's some clips that I show that are technically on YouTube, but they're from a Discovery Channel or BBC or something really wonderful. And so like that I'm okay with. But then yes, you have the reverse where like a teacher's not reading aloud a book because they're showing another person reading the book. So once again, right? Like good and bad, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I just want to highlight your talk about the shared experience because
Yes,
for me, that's a big part of the shift that's happened with this
yeah,
generation that now everything's one to one. But it used to be that you went to the movies with your parents and then you talked about it, right?
yeah.
So, and that's like a big part of what's missing here.
Yep. And Felicia's got like a follow-up that like she's seeing that it's more just full lessons on YouTube, which I've actually never seen before. So that must of course be happening places, and that is alarming. And I almost challenge every teacher, go a day without using the board to just see what it's like. Like use the easel, see, get comfortable because things become habits, right? Like and I think newer teachers like don't really know another way. So that's professional development as well, right?
Yes, and teachers like are required to go through so much professional development. I mean, compared to professionals in other industries, not medicine, but in general, that I think there really are opportunities to embed these kinds of best practices.
Yeah. What do you say to people, whether it be parents or teachers, that say we really need children to be using this technology to prepare them for the future? It's a digital world. If we don't do this, they won't be prepared. Screens aren't going anywhere. There's a lot of variations of this argument. And I love adding new pieces to my toolbox to answer that question as well.
Yeah, I think a big part of it is that AI is designed to tell you things based on what's happened in the past. And so, what AI isn't equipped to do is to respond well to new situations, right? Because the data hasn't been fed into it. That will require human beings who can think. And I don't know if you've seen the meme that goes around on social media about how, like, in the future, there will be two kinds of people, people who can think, and people who work for them, right? But I do really think that, like, what's left for human beings is cognition, not just like spitting out results based on what's worked in the past, because think about the challenges that we're going to confront in the future, including climate change. They haven't happened before. And so AI does not have the right answers for us. And the data is clear that the way that we teach kids to think is by reading books on paper, is by writing papers and speaking and making arguments. We've teachers have been doing this for many generations, so I feel confident in saying that they can do it without screens.
So the next question kind of links to this, and this is a question of Corey, and it's a question that I also have because I told you that at our district, in our school district, we have policies that are currently, they're in place, although they're probably going to be eliminated or they are trying to eliminate them, that allow a parent like myself who would like to opt out their children, not from computers altogether. Again, the computer labs and the shared content, and that's to learn about technology, to learn about this and about that, but not as a one-to-one core curriculum, math and science, etc. So there is a movement now for example, just in my elementary school, about 25% of the parents requested the possibility to opt out. So, or opt out from one-to-one. And the question that Corey has is that is maybe it's going to take a few more years until education technology is going to go away as a method to deliver the curriculum for the core subjects. But do you recommend at this point opting out from the one-to-one devices in the public schools that are, asking for this one-to-one?
So this is a really tricky situation. So first of all, we should all understand our rights, which is that under the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, COPA, parents have the right to opt out of apps that collect our children's data. I spoke to Lindsay Lieberman, a friend of mine who is one of the leaders of the efforts to get screens out of public schools in Washington, D.C. And she's also really, like, in my opinion, the attorney you call when your child has been, the victim of new deepfakes. And she told me, you don't have the right to opt out of the Chromebook, but you have the right to opt out of all the apps on the Chromebook. Having said that, two things. One, parent advocacy is going to play a huge role here. So you may technically not have the right to opt out of a Chromebook, but I can tell you parents in my town are talking about just not going and picking them up in August. I have one mom friend who's a physician. She says she's not picking up the Chromebook for her third child. She's writing a letter and saying that as a physician, she's witnessed the harms of this Chromebook on her two older children, and she's not getting it. That leaves schools in a really tricky position because, in my experience, they're not prepared for what to do next. And maybe Jill can speak more to this from the teacher's perspective. But like what Lindsay told me is that, okay, you may have this right, but in Washington, D.C., there is no alternative curriculum, right? So on the one hand, I don't want my daughter in schools, it's on screens in schools. It's very tempting to say, I'm opting out of every app. On the other hand, you may be like greeted with total puzzlement, right? Like no one knows what the policy is. There isn't some online form for your school district that allows you to opt out. But also, okay, so now what is my child going to learn, right? Because there's not a curriculum set up for them. And that's really the key challenge here.
I agree. And I think that curriculum is like, once again, like I feel like so much of this as I've dived, it has to do with district leadership, right? Because if you have a curriculum that is print-based, real workbooks, mentor text, textbooks, whatever we want to call them now, right? I don't care but real materials, you're not really going to need to use the device, right? But teachers can't be expected to purchase this stuff on their own, and they have to have these materials. So I feel like it's the same thing I'm noticing in everywhere I am. It's like, do you have a printer in your room? Do you have a curriculum? Otherwise, it is easier. And if you're trying to opt out in a district where the only curriculum is, iReady or something that's on a computer, the district's going to feel that they can't have you opt out. What are you going to have the kid
Right.
do?
What are you going to do, right? Even though you have this right. And also, so I have an interest as a parent in having my daughter not on screens. I also have an interest in her learning,
Yes,
right?
exactly.
So, like, I don't want her to miss out on learning material because there's no curriculum for her.
Yeah.
But I want to
But
ask both of you. Oh, I'm sorry, Kara.
so just one other thing I'd add is that, like, this situation is screaming for a lawsuit.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you first of all, because you have heard, or I have heard, Jill was and myself were moderating sessions with different people, including Jared Horvath from Digital Illusion and Emily Churkin, and also Andy Lydell. And one of the things that they say is that it's not about the curriculum. We are not asking, the way that they see this, we are not asking, and we can't, as parents, we should not be asking for change of curriculum in the public school. The public school is responsible for the curriculum. What we are asking for is a different way to deliver the curriculum. The same curriculum, but deliver it not in a technology that all that has been shown so far is the harms, and there's no benefits whatsoever. So I think my logistical question, and I'm hearing this from several people, not only from my district, are we living in an era right now that because of what has happened since 2015, especially after the last 6 years, COVID, etc., maybe there's just not enough current textbooks? Somebody in our group was asking Who is going with like? Do your kids actually still have in their backpacks real textbooks like you and I had when we were young? Is it maybe there's just not enough at this point resources? But then on the flip side, I am hearing about private schools like the Waldorf or Mainline Classical Academy close to where we live that are pretty much delivering the whole curriculum without screens. So is the lack of books an issue in your opinions, both of you?
I promise you that it is not difficult to obtain books. I believe that my school district is spending $200,000 a year on these Chromebooks, which is far less than the cost of providing students with books. I have been told that a very senior administrator in my school district has made the argument, oh, but students' backpacks will be too heavy. Um, and I would just say, like, maybe the answer truly is chapter by chapter, right? Getting the digital rights to print things for your students and giving them a chapter at a time so they don't have to carry the 200-pound backpack. But the interesting thing about all of these solutions is that they would save districts an enormous amount of money. And all of the books that there's no question that the books that we need to teach children are readily available from textbook companies.
Yeah,
I've
my
written some
the
of
way it is in my district is each unit has a book. So it is not insanely large, unbearable textbook. It is like a workbook for each unit. And this seems to me the easiest thing to solve. Like I think we put people on the moon. I think we can figure out a way for students to take home some sort of a book on their topic. Like this, like it gets almost kind of funny. I even
Yes.
once heard somebody say that this movement is a conspiracy theory by book companies and textbook companies to sell more books. I'm like, okay. So it's just wild what's out there. I have like a question that's a little off, but I'm actually just really curious to hear your take on it because I know you know so much about social media. I'm finding that a lot of ed tech platforms mimic all of the things that we're really worried about with social media. So I'm wondering if you can speak to that, like, you know, the avatars and then you feel like it's yourself and you can personalize it and the earning the points. And then there's even ones where like other classmates can like and heart, like, because I think there's like so many problems and this is just another one.
Yeah, and so like one of the key features of social media is like the dopamine hits, right?
Yeah.
The instantaneous rewards, whether it's someone liked your picture and validated you as a human being, or it's, you know, a video game where you're racking up points and beating other players and things like that. And I guess when I think about the skills that are most critical for my own children and for my students, it's like I said, like the critical thinking. And, you know, I am someone who like read War and Peace for fun over the summer, right? Why? Because I didn't believe that I should be getting these type of dopamine hits every 10 to 15 seconds. And so I think part of what it does is it makes it difficult for students to get interested in and to focus on analog things that are actually incredibly important. And there's so much wrapped up in that, right? And like giving students like constant stimulation and rewards for things. But like that's just not what life gives you. That's not what you're going to get when you go into the workforce for those who have this workforce argument. It's also the case that like kids can't focus and be with themselves. So one of the things that I've been doing is talks at staff trainings for summer camps, convincing counselors why they should put their phones away for the summer. And the thing is, you know, it's really a problem if every time you have 2 seconds because you're second in line, you have to pull out a phone for all of these rewards and dopamine hits. You don't learn how to be like as a human being, how to get comfortable with your thoughts, right? So then every time you have a negative emotion, rather than dealing with your problem, you'll just pull out a video game or something else on your phone. And again, you've been taught to expect that in school. Chris Hayes, the news anchor, wrote a really interesting book recently where he talked about this research where researchers put people in a room by themselves and then they offered them electric shocks. And some people signed up for the electric shocks to escape their boredom because we're at a place where people have not learned to sit in their heads, right? To like get to know themselves. And all of that stems from this idea that there should be constant, hits and constant rewards, and, life should be a game. And that's just not what students are going to encounter after they graduate.
Thank you so much for that. I really agreed. A lot of it is also modeling. We all have a role to play. Parents at home modeling, and camp counselors and teachers, and like it really is a issue that affects all of us, and we all need to be a part of the solution. I have to leave to get my class, so I want to say want leave you with one more question that maybe at some point you can answer before I hop off, or even when I do, about like what gives you hope, because I like to end on a positive note of like of the things that we can do, more of your solutions and ways to give us hope, because I do have a lot of hope, and I know there's a lot of people that feel that way, and I'm thankful for people like you helping in this fight.
Thank you so much. You're incredible. I'm so delighted to chat with you today.
I'm still staying for 10 more minutes.
Perfect.
She has to go, but we're not done
Yep.
yet. Of
Can I answer her question?
course.
Okay, so I would say the National Bureau of Economic Research published a study recently about researchers who asked college students, how much would we have to pay you to deactivate your TikTok or your Instagram account for a month? And when I say this to parents and I invite them to guess, they throw out answers. $1 million, $100,000. No. The average answer was $50 and the median was lower. It was $30. Then the researchers said to these college students, okay, now how much money would we have to pay you to deactivate these accounts if everyone else here does the same? No parent has ever correctly guessed the answer to this question, which is that the students were willing to pay the researchers to make that happen. And that really does give me hope because it tells me that young people know that social media and screens are bad for them. The problem is they fear being social pariahs if they're not on them. And so, if everyone does the same thing, or even if a critical mass of students don't have smartphones at home, aren't on screens at school, young people have to find other ways to communicate. And so I think young people are really smart. I don't think they want to feel exhausted and stressed when they come home from school, which is what happens when you stare at a screen all day. And I think parents are in this fight. Parents are saying they're not picking up the Chromebooks. Parents are opting out, and that's going to force schools to change.
I think this is fascinating. Going back to what you were saying to Jill a couple of minutes ago, I think an observation, about the inability of children to basically be bored, I think it's so relevant to us as adults as well. I was recently watching, I mean, I'm a victim of this also, but I take responsibility. I still watch, I'm on Facebook to promote webinars like this one, and I watch once in a while reels. And I've watched recently a couple of reels from the 1990s, 1980s, and you see that the dynamics was different. Like, let's say a whole show. They were talking more slowly,
Mhm.
taking their time. Somebody was telling, maybe a participant was telling a joke that lasted for a long time, and you see everybody's quiet and everybody's listening, and now the reality is so different because we can't just like listen. It's the same thing when I bike to the train station, take on the train. Everybody, including myself, on the train is like this. Nobody's talking to each other. And we know we've discussed all of this. We know all of this. We see the social media and everything. But I think that if it's happening to us adults, we are losing our ability to just stand and relax and be bored and let the thoughts, we walk and we're in an elevator, and in the elevator, nobody's just like this, or not a lot of people. And people are just, okay, I got to do something. I got to do something. I think this is a big part of the problem, and we're transmitting it. I mean, the kids are getting it from us.
Right. So all sorts of research tells us that kids learn and adopt our digital habits. One thing that my family is doing this summer for the first time is we are going to family summer camp. Hopefully we won't even have cell phone reception, but even if we do, our phones will be in our cabin and we're going to be with our kids horseback riding and boating for the week. And I really invite parents to think about opportunities like that. It doesn't have to be very high cost of go to the beach for the day or a pool, leave your phones behind, and then talk afterwards about how you guys felt, right? What did that feel like? Um, and I think you come to realize over time that it's actually really fabulous. It feels really great to not feel tethered to your phone all the time. A book that I'd recommend is Dopamine Kids by Micheline Doucleff. I interviewed her for CNN, and I think, there is a pretty significant amount of privilege in being able to get rid of digital devices generally. Um, but one thing I noticed is she wrote in the book how happy she was when she did it. And I interviewed her for CNN at a moment when I was very frazzled. My kids had left the house and then come back because they didn't have the right coats. And I'm on Zoom and I looked at her and she looked so happy. I totally bought it, right? That she was living her best life because she wasn't constantly checking her phone. And so I just invite you to find ways. Summer's like the best and easiest time of year to do that, right? To go for a hike, to spend a family day without phones. And I think it's a really great experiment. And then you can all talk about it.
This is great. I have a practical question that I'm getting a text about, and that is related to, so, why are the schools are using the computers. And some of the schools or the leadership of the school, the districts, the superintendent, et cetera, is because most of the states, or maybe all of them, I don't know, have moved to digital testing. So, for example, in Pennsylvania, the PSSA, which is these testing from third grade, are now mandated to do on a digital. We don't have the option anymore. Previously, it was still optional, previous years, to do it on pen and paper, but now it's all digital. And I think that some of the teachers or the districts that need, the scoring want to prepare their children to not necessarily to the real world, but how to take the equivalent test to PSSA, or each state has their own tests. What do you think about this? And do you think that there's going to be a trend of going back to non-digital testing?
There should be, but that will also require parent advocacy. I don't think it will happen organically. That's an argument I definitely hear here in New Jersey as well. And I just think that it's one of those things that we as parent advocates need to have on our list, right? Is advocating for tests to go back to paper. And if students take tests on paper, by the way, they'll perform better.
That's probably the case. Yes, that's what I'm hearing. So just to kind of understand, going back to the computers in school, the education technology, the Chromebooks. So when do you think? I mean, it sounds like you don't think that maybe for middle school, elementary school, there's a good use to do math delivery. But what are some of the use cases, scenarios that you think? I mean, you mentioned, for example, a YouTube that you sometimes use. What do you think in middle school should be the use of technology? Because middle school, often we hear, high school maybe preparation for college, and there's more sophisticated stuff like graphing and whatever. But what are your thoughts about using computers in middle school?
So I think in middle school, students are ready to start doing research on search engines under supervision, right? Whether that's a parent or a teacher, and you look at the results and you say, and a good thing to do is compare the results to what's in your textbook. Ha, like AI completely made this up. That's a great example, right? That's a great lesson for kids. But to learn to start to do that research and then to type papers on a computer, I think is okay. Because that's something that they'll have to do moving forward. But the point is that most of their school day should be off screens apart from technology class. So most of their school day, like human beings evolved to move our bodies, to socialize, to talk to people face to face. And the vast majority of the school day, right through high school, should involve all of that, right? Should involve movement breaks and using our senses and using our hands and solving a puzzle that way and writing with pencils on paper. So there's a time for students to do that, but it's not all day every day.
Thank you. We have time for a couple more questions, and then I know you're working and I'm working, but I do want to ask you more of a kind of a high level, going back to post school. I mean, you've described the ability of kids to do deep writing or deep tasks lower than before. I'm telling you that I speak with education and medicine, deans and things of that sort, and I'm hearing the same thing, that the level of the ability of the young people in medical school to concentrate and read deeply is much different. And just recently, I sat with a few students, a group of students, and they told me that there's actually no more textbooks. I mean, it used to be that all of medicine, the main bulk of the studying was for, Harrison book and this book and the cardiology and internal medicine and surgery. But now there's no more books. It's more like online flashcards or things that are like little bits of processing. I'm hearing the same thing also from there was one of the parents who reached out to me as a senior engineer at Comcast, and he told me that in the last maybe 5 years or so, the level of deep thought of the young engineers and their ability not to code, but to really be thoughtful about things and to understand the bottom or the root cause is much less. So we see this kind of across the board. And there's never going to be a way but to prove this. But you really think that this is related to the how the exposure of screens, cell phones, social media, education technology, all of that?
I absolutely do. What else could account for this profound shift at the same time as, smartphones took off starting in the year 2007? I also just recently co-authored a paper with John Haidt and leading researchers around the world, and it's a consensus statement on what we all agree the literature tells us about the effects of screens on kids. And so that's a really interesting piece to look at because some of the data can be disparate, but to me, that's what these devices do is they fragment our attention because they've been designed to pull us in. And I think, on a more profound level, young people are not exploring their identities. Adolescence is a time where you're supposed to develop yourself, like figure out what you're interested in, figure out who you are as a person. I know, like for me, so much of the joy in life comes from things that involve flow, right? Paying attention to one thing and really getting absorbed in your work and producing something great. I don't think anyone can do that while multitasking because we know the human brain can't multitask. And more generally, I think it's why our health is suffering. And so, why are we all so stressed out and exhausted? It's because the human brain can't multitask. And every time we stop to look at a notification, our brain has to disengage from one thing, engage in that, disengage from that, and go back. And it is physically exhausting. It's not what we evolved to do. The average teenager gets something like 234 notifications on their phone every day. A quarter of those come in during the school day. Um, Of course, we're stressed and exhausted. Of course, people's mental health is suffering, and it's adults too. Um, I Paul Leonardi wrote a book called Digital Exhaustion, which I highly recommend for adults, looking at how we can change our practices. And I've gotten better about doing things like batching my emails. I can't stop and respond to every single email as it comes in, or I'll never finish my next book, right? And so really like learning to minimize those distractions. I've worked hard and I'm so much less tethered to my phone than I used to be. And I encourage you to give it a try.
Digital exhaustion. I'm just putting it in the, I've been copying some
Yeah.
link things that you've been saying. So we are out of time, but I wanted to ask you maybe one last question. You're a parent of two kids, or maybe more. I don't know how many kids you have. Two?
Two.
I have also two kids who are in elementary. Um, a lot of parents will be watching this and are watching this. What would be, other than you gave a lot of good tips, but it's kind of a gift to finish this amazing session. What are some tips that you have for parents, maybe for their well-being? You just told us about disconnecting for 24 hours, going to the beach, doing something like this, but also specifically for our children who sometimes, like you said, 90%, more than 90% of kids are in public school, and they will be, at least at this point, on the devices. What are some suggestions that you have practical?
So obviously we have to advocate to change things in schools, but while we're waiting for that to change, what we do at home becomes even more important. I interviewed one expert for CNN who suggested that we think of digital devices the way we think of household appliances. So just like my daughters don't have their own microwaves and refrigerators, they don't need their own devices, right? Now, my daughters are young. We have a desktop computer on the built-in desk of in our kitchen so that everything that is done on that computer is highly visible to caretakers. And they play a game called ABC Mouse. And it's not how I'd want them to spend the bulk of their time, but once in a while, it's good for them. So thinking about devices as appliances that are shared, that are in central places in your house, unless you have a kid with ADHD who can't concentrate in the kitchen, right? Um, And then really making sure that there are no screens in bedrooms, and that includes ours. So you have a central station, you might even need to lock it, where everyone charges their phones overnight. Because one of the things we know from research is that kids are really missing out on sleep because they're up scrolling at night. And not getting enough sleep is associated with so many harms in kids, accidents, injuries, obesity, depression. I could go on and on. And so, really thinking about being mindful. And just the last thing I'd say is that there's this big myth that kids want to spend all their time on screens. Yes, many kids get addicted to screens, but actually, the researcher Dana Boyd asked young people what they'd like to do. They would much rather get together with their friends in person. And why don't they? Because they don't have transportation, because of their parents' rules, because of their overscheduled lives. So I think what we have to focus on as parents is finding alternatives that are even more attractive. Let's go to the pool and pick up ice cream and bring your friends. What kid is going to say no to that?
Excellent. Well, listen, Kara, this has been fascinating, and thank you for all the work that you're doing, and also continued, your books and your CNN articles that, I'm absolutely reading. A lot of our community members are reading because you are so insightful, and you also bring up such important work from other people as well. So thank you for sharing with us all of these insights, and happy to stay in touch with you. And of course, I'll send you the recording when it's available. And thank you, all of the audience, all of you taking the time in the middle of the day to join us here. And as I mentioned, we will share this recording. You're welcome to share with your spouses, friends, family members, and more. So thank you very much, Kara. It was awesome. I learned so much.
Oh, thank you so much. Definitely stay in touch, and thanks for your work as well.
Okay. Bye, everybody.